It is just an honor and a privilege to bring back to the show Mr. Endodontist Joel Clark, small DDS, MBA, PCC, FICD. I brought him on, God, back when it was a baby show. It was back in 2016. Can you believe that? That was 5 years ago. And you look 5 years younger than you did then. And now you brought in your mini-me, Mac McDonald. But let me introduce, I'll introduce Joel again, then Mac. Dr. Joel Clark, small DDS, MBA, PCC, which stands for Professional Certified Coach. FICD, that's Fellowship International Congress of Dentistry. He's a board-certified executive leadership coach, entrepreneur, author, speaker, and endodontist. He received his dental degree in endodontic training from the University of Texas at Houston. He later attended Texas Tech University, where he received his Master of Business Administration degree with an emphasis in healthcare management. He received his postgraduate certificate in executive coaching from the Jindal School of Management at the University of Texas at Dallas. He holds a designation of Professional Certified Coach with the International Coaching Federation. He is the author of the recently released book, Face to Face, a leadership guide for healthcare professionals and entrepreneurs. He's the co-founder of Phase 2 Dental Transitions, a dental transition firm located in Dallas, Texas. Phase 2 is a consultancy and brokerage firm for endodontic practices nationwide, and all my endodontist homies. I went from 7th grade to the end of dental school. Me, John Leese, and Alan Tebow started in the 7th grade. Went to Bishop Carroll, went to UMKC, and they're both endodontists. So I was the oddball. I should have been an endodontist like those two told me to. But Dr. Small recently retired after 41 years of clinical endodontic practice. He now lives in Golden, Colorado, where he devotes his time to transition consulting, writing, and coaching healthcare professionals on leadership and practice culture development. He has lectured extensively on these subjects. His coaching clients cover a broad spectrum of high-achieving dental specialists and restorative dentists. And I just want to say that John Leese was not the one who said, "Will you get him on your show?" It wasn't John Leese, okay? Just remember that. It was not the endodontist John Leese in LA. And his buddy, Dr. Edwin A. McDonald, DDS, he goes by Mac, has developed and continues to lead a thriving fee-for-service dental practice in Plano, Texas. He is actively involved in dental education as a visiting faculty member at the Pankey Institute, Spear Education, and a frequent speaker for numerous regional and national dental meetings. As he's worked with dentists all over the United States, he saw firsthand the significant need for more effective leadership in dentists and dental practice owners of all ages. Understanding the importance of establishing effective leadership for growth and change, Mac enrolled in the executive and professional coaching program from the Naveen Jindal School of Management at the University of Texas, Dallas. He completed the program and formed the Line of Sight Coaching with his longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Joe Small. Their coaching practice focuses on leadership development, professional seeking, more rewarding, enjoyable, and profitable careers in today's complex marketplace. They are both certified to administer the Leadership Circle Profile. This assessment is widely considered one of the most scientifically validated leadership profiles available in 2021. Line of Sight Coaching is currently leading multiple leader-to-leader coaching mastermind groups. Dr. Mack continues to be a student of leadership development, organizational culture, and business performance. He wrote Unchanging Points of Light, a personal expression of values established from the Bible. These values serve as a guide for our lives. And by the way, my two oldest sisters are nuns, and I'll never forget what my oldest sister always tells me, that she's read every work of every major religion. In fact, her YouTube channel of a nun talking to other nuns, she's got more followers than me. So I can't even beat my older sister on a YouTube channel. But she basically said that in reading Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, every major religion. Let's see if I can pull it up. But basically the golden rule is the only thing you see. The oldest works are Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and all the other ones. It's the only thing you find in every religious text. You don't find the name Howard or John or Paul, but you find the golden rule. And There's a lot of information in that 5,000 year book. But I brought you guys back to the show because I have so many questions for you, and all my endodontist friends want you to come on, but not John Lease. That wasn't him. And so my gosh, so I just want to start with the heavy hitting questions. It looks like the DSOs are 2 out of 3 of their docs are women, and women and men are different, and women always marry economically across or up. Like a woman dentist is not going to marry the cook at the Waffle House, but the valedictorian of your dental school class, if she looked just right and had Chanel number 5 on, he'd marry her in a second. So my homie men, 2 out of 3 have a unemployed wife who sits home and her only job is to raise children and destroy $10,000 of capital a month. But all the women dentists, they're all married to an oral surgeon, a physician, a lawyer, a banker, a candlestick maker. All their husbands have a job for about the same income. And then here's the deal they tell me, and it's sad, and I know this, I grew up with 5 sisters, that if you're a woman dentist and you marry a man dentist and you come home, your husband's just going to sit in front of ESPN and watch the important ball game, and he has no desire to go through the backpack and treat it like a crime scene to see if all their notes are signed and the homework's done. And as far as cooking, you can order a Domino's pizza in 30 minutes. So she ends up doing all that stuff. So then she's like, I don't really want to own. My husband's an oral surgeon. I'm just going to work at Aspen Dental 3 days a week. And I'm professional, and I'll get my professionalism out there. But biology says the number 1 goal of a species is to reproduce have offspring, and my children, family first, dentistry second. So I'm asking you, do you think that's a major driver in this DSO expansion of dentistry going from an all-male profession to now half the graduating class women?
That's a good question. I think for women particularly, one of the reasons they're attracted to DSOs, if they are, and there are a lot of women that own practices, but if they are attracted to DSOs, it's because of the flexibility they have in the employment arrangement they have with the DSOs. They can come in, come out of practice, have children, raise families, get back into it. If you're a practice owner, you're a little bit more restricted in what you can do in that environment. You're pretty much tied to the practice. So it does have some appeals to it that they don't find in a private ownership relationship with a practice.
I would say that one of the things that's missing, male or female, but especially for a female in a DSO, is the meaning from work, because oftentimes the pace of work is so intense, and it's harder for them to draw out the meaning. So I think in the part-time career path that they have a lot of choices, quite frankly, to work. If they don't have to be the sole income earner, they have some flexibility to create the practice that they want. I mean, Howard, this is the way I look at this in America, and you can do what you want to do. You don't have to go down a fee-for-service practice path, or you don't have to go down a DSO path. You can pick a path. Now, there's price to pay in terms of incomes, but I think there can be flexibility. Now, maybe the flexibility would come practicing in a group that is not necessarily a large DSO. But I think the meaning from work is a big deal for everybody. And I think the flexibility can come in a variety of ways. I know a lot of small group and solo practitioners that would love to have another dentist on a limited time basis, and would find a way to carve out a mechanism that would work, that might not lead to a full-time income, but maybe she wouldn't need a full-time income.
So what are you, leadership is, I mean, that's, I mean, they go to school, they mastered math, physics, they know the cosine tangent, they know everything with math. Applied math is physics, applied physics chemistry, applied chemistry is biology. But man, they just don't, they come out of school and, dude, they can't lead 5 ducks to a pond. How do you, and then on top of that, I'm sorry, but when I go into a dental school class, I'm in shock that people are that young or holding a drill in their hand. I mean, they're just babies. And every year you get older, they look so much younger. Now when you walk into a dental school class, it looks like when I got a dental school and I walked into a kindergarten class. how can you, are you just born a leader? And what you're doing is going to people that don't have enough personality to become an accountant, and you're just trying to like train them to be a leader. So is leadership natural or is it trainable?
It's definitely trainable. You make a great point, Howard, in that um, sometimes when these young people come into practice, they haven't had enough life experience. In other words, they haven't had an issue, they haven't addressed enough problems in order to realize that they need to be leaders in their practice. So it usually takes them a little while before they start running into the problems they encounter, not having great leadership skills, and that's when they contact us. What happens, and I can share my example with you. I went back to get my MBA thinking that I needed to know the business of dentistry better, that there was somewhat of a void in my practice. It wasn't a financial void, but just a void that existed. I wasn't sure what it was. When I came out of the MBA, I learned all the stuff you just mentioned, the mathematics, the financials, the accounting, all that kind of stuff. But what I realized is that I had a leadership developmental gap, and I was still practicing, I was still leading my practice like I did 27 years ago when I got out of school and started my dental practice. And I needed to close that gap and to scale my leadership to the current complexity of my practice. So that's a big issue with a lot of our colleagues. They haven't scaled their leadership skills, or they didn't have them to begin with.
So, the thing I really also wanted to talk to you about so much is the fact that you're on the ground in real time, seeing what the problems are, and what are the main challenges that you're seeing now. And by the way, from a technical point of view, is you see coaching and consulting, consulting. Is a dental consultant and a dental coach, are those synonyms or are they different?
Go ahead, Matt.
I think they're used a lot as synonyms, but they're completely different in my view. So, a coach in the true sense of the word is somebody that works with you in such a way, in a facilitative way, using inquiry, support, and challenge to help you find the answers that are already in you to what you're looking for, whether that's leadership or something else. A consultant is somebody that you've hired to bring you solutions to very specific problems that you have in your practice, in your business, in your organization. So I think there are actually two different versions of helping professions and two very valid different versions of the same thing. But a consultant is usually in the tell mode. I'm bringing a solution to you. A coach, as I would see it, is usually in the asking mode, trying to understand, who you are, how do you think, what are your beliefs and assumptions and patterns of thought, what's getting you into the situation where you are, what's keeping you from going where you want to be, that kind of thing. Now, there are all different kinds of coaches for sure, but I think that's the main difference. Joel would probably have a lot to add here. When we think of coach, we think that Hideki Matsuyama, that won the Masters last week, has a swing coach, and he does. But so that person is technically teaching Hideki, observing his swing, fine-tuning it, helping him with that. That's really instruction as opposed to coaching like we would think about it. I don't know, Joel, what you would add to that.
No, I'm with you. I'm good.
Oh my God. My mind went right to Tiger. I mean, my God, how fast did that guy have to go? I mean, the car rolled over like 7 times. Do you think he's ever going to get back good enough to go get a Masters again?
I would love it, but I tell you, that's asking a lot of a guy with a back that's already injured, and he's 46 or 7, whatever Tiger is. I would love it. I would pray that, but that's a tough one. I just want him to be healthy and okay, and I don't know. That's a long way to come to compete where he's used to.
And what you said is so true. Those guys, I mean, my gosh, nobody gets to the Olympics without starting, around the age of 5, like Tiger did. They have their sport coach, like gymnastics. They have a strength coach. They have a nutrition coach. They have a sports psychologist. I have I have about a dozen professional athletes over there. Most of them were from the Arizona Cardinals because their training camp was like literally straight down the street from where I am, about 2 miles. And they said that actually the most important, and the two of the coaches and two of the players live on my street, and they said that the sports psychology coach said that just they're young kids and keeping their head in the game and keeping them focused. He goes, they got the talent, they got the muscle, they can learn to eat right and everything, but just the thoughts in between their ears is their biggest enemy. And I always thought that with dentists, like you'll go into every medical dental building, there's 8 practices in there. And my favorite chart, I like to say, which is, I think just succinctly sums it up, is when you go to the new car. Where's the new car? So the average American buys 13 new cars between the ages of 16 and 76. So in 60 years, they buy 13 brand new cars with a median average price of $33,560. And I got several sources on this. And 95% of the dentists will never do that one time in their life. And they sit in there and they say, oh, it's the economy and it's the government, and it's a trade deficit, and it's a China. They got a million excuses. I'm like, okay, but that 8th dentist down there, he works Monday through Thursday. But every Friday he comes in and he does a $35,000 case. He does, and a lot of them I didn't even do. Like, I would sell it, but I'm not going to learn anesthesiology. I don't want to do that. I've been a journalist that owned a dental magazine since 1994. Places like a lot of these dental malpractice, they send me their monthly claims every month, because they want the media to be informed of this stuff. And anytime it's $1 to $3 million, somebody died with an IV in their arm, and then they have to settle because if they take you to court, they're going to bring in a board-certified anesthesiologist who's just going to play with you in front of the jury for a week, leaving no doubt that you don't know anything, and you lose every time. So I just have the same guy that does an epidural on your wife when she has a baby at 3 a.m, just having a dental anesthesiologist come in. When they had 3 molars, I'm not going to sit down and do 3 molars back to back. I don't even, if you could do 3 molars in a row, you should have been an endodontist. And then place an implant, treat other people like you want to be treated. If I got a periodontist who sunk 10,000 implants, why the hell would I place the implant on you? So I'm basically doing nothing. And they just come in and knock out this huge case. I still don't know why you would want to go learn how to place implants when you already got 5,000 oral surgeons and 5,000 periodontists. And if the ones in your own town won't do it because they don't want to hurt their business, well, if you're in Phoenix, go get the ones from Tucson, Flagstaff, or fly one in from Albuquerque. But the problem is, the reason that guy will never sell one case in his life is because when a patient walks in, his God, he might say he's a Christian or a Muslim or Hindu or whatever, but his God's Delta Dental. And he'll walk in and he'll say, well, the Lord God, Delta Dental, says we can only fix 1 tooth a year. So what's the worst tooth in your whole head? And then they point to like the disaster and then do a root canal development crown and say, okay, well, we have to wait till next year till the Lord God and Savior Blue Cross and Blue Shield gives us another $1,000. So I'll see you next year. And so what I'm getting at as a sports psychologist, I think anybody can raise an army and go defeat another army. The hardest person to defeat is the man in the mirror. You got all these thoughts in your head, and all you do is just say bad things about yourself. I'm constantly telling my 4 boys, okay, what you just said, if you said that about one of my grandchildren, I'd be really mad. But you just said it about yourself, and I don't know why you're doing that at 30, but just don't say it out loud in front of my grandchildren. I don't want them to learn that. I don't even know where this is coming from, but people it's like they're born just to shoot themselves in the feet. So so that's what you're saying is the difference between coaching and consulting? Is that the succinct difference then?
If I could back up from what you just said to the point you're talking about professional athletes and their trainers, I think you make a great point. It applies directly to coaching, Howard. The complexity of sports has increased so much over the past 20, 30 years. These same players didn't have the same coaches. They didn't have the sports psychologists. They didn't have the strength and conditioning coaches back then, but now they do because the complexity of their sport has increased exponentially. The same is true in our environment. I don't know about you, Howard, but when I started my practice 40 something years ago, it was pretty much an easy thing. Now the complexity of what we're doing has increased so significantly that if we don't keep up with it, we develop what we call a leadership development gap. And the longer it goes without closing the gap, the bigger the gap becomes and the harder it is to catch up. So this is where we come in and we help people think properly. It's not just what they do, it's how they think about things and how they develop the culture in their practice, because it's a culture, and this is our firm belief, that it's a culture that puts people in your chair. It's not your technical skills, it's not your technology, it's not how smart you were in dental school, where you finished in your class, but the culture is what people see, and that's what drives and puts people in our chair. So we help people not only become leaders, we want them to become leaders because leaders develop cultures, and culture is what brings our success.
Well said. And I'll tell you what, everybody knows it. Go to the most famous dentist in Beverly Hills, Scottsdale, and Manhattan for cosmetic dentistry, and their skill set is marketing, advertising, Instagram, influence. Their prices are very high, and you're paying for a Chevy and at the price of a Mercedes-Benz. And then you go into the suburbs, like leave Scottsdale and go to like any suburb, Glendale, Peoria, Mesa. You'll get the same cosmetic dentistry for half the price with double the quality, because everybody has different skill sets. And what bothers me the most in medicine is everybody refers based on the chair-side manner. And it's like, okay, there's 1 million physicians, only half of them are board certified. You know he's board certified? I don't know, but I'll tell you what, he's so sweet. I love him. And I'm like, well, okay, let's look at the most important thing to me, since I'm a man turning 59 this year, is a CABG, a coronary artery bypass graft. When you do a CABG, you have to report to the federal government if they're still alive after 24 hours. In Arizona, that's between 1 and 11% of your patients. I don't care if you were the prettiest woman in the world. If you kill 11 people in the first day, I don't want you to work on me. And if you were the meanest jerk on earth, but you only killed one person in 24 hours, I want you. But they refer based on chair-side manner. So if you have a great marketing advertising skill, I mean, we just see it all the time. Some of the busiest dentists in the world are not good clinicians, and then some of the and then some of the best clinicians in the world, their wife's out selling Amway, trying to put food on the table. So they're just separate skill sets. And I'll give you one last example. When I moved to Arizona, it was so mind-blowing to me how half of my Hispanic friends could understand their grandma speaking Spanish, but they couldn't speak a word of it. I'm like, well, how do you know what Nanny's saying and you can't parrot it back? But obviously it's two different parts of the brain, because it's like the norm. It's all you see. Like when I started lecturing around the world starting in 90, I always had a translator in all those countries. I haven't had a translator in decades because, well, not decades, but in the last decade, because now you go there and they'll say, yeah, 90% of your audience cannot speak a word of English and they can't talk to you, but they all know what you're saying. And it's like, so they're different skill sets. So back to the original question I started with, I think some leaders are just, I'm sure Napoleon, a lot of his gift was at birth, but are you having success taking someone who didn't have enough personality to become an accountant to become a leader? I mean, can you really do that transition? I mean, you couldn't make me an NBA player.
But yeah, that would be a physical limitation there. It's going to be an NBA player. You couldn't make me Tiger Woods or Hideki Matsuyama either. But I think the answer to that is yes, because the very first thing, Howard, as far as I think the way we look at leadership is the most important person to lead and the most challenging person to lead is yourself. And so that's where the work's always going to start. And so in my bio, you mentioned the leadership circle profile as a thing that Joel directed me to, and early on we got committed to, because it's a profile to take a deep dive into understanding yourself. Why do you show up the way that you show up? What do you believe, assume? What are your patterns of thinking? And you alluded to that. Why are there great dentists who aren't busy? And a lot it is about, what do they believe? How do they think? What's in their way? And absolutely, I think we have good success working with good people who just need to to be unchained, if you would, from all of that internal stuff. They first need to lead themselves. So here's an example of sometimes when you can dive deep with somebody inside themselves, you can see what it is they believe in and what gets in their way. So what is it about that person that interferes with them presenting a comprehensive treatment plan to a patient that the patient needs, not something that's aggressively done beyond the patient needs, but just what they need. And what is it about their beliefs about themselves that keeps them from creating abundance and those kinds of things? What is it that keeps them from communicating to their team? What is it that keeps them from taking action and going forward? What is it that keeps them from connecting? And there's a lot of things inside of people that that keep the leader that's there locked up. So our first job is to, or at least that's how I see it, and Joel can respond, is to help that person unlock themselves and then figure out how do they show up to the most important people in their life, their family, their team, and start to become more effective, because there's a lot that they can learn about how they learn to be successful initially is not necessarily what they need going forward. What got them here won't get them there. And I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but the hardest person to lead is yourself, but the most important person to lead is yourself. And so that's where we start.
Yeah.
It's an inside journey. It's not, there's 100 books probably on your shelf, Howard, because you've probably read 1,000 that are about leadership. And most of them is about the external, the visible things you can see of leadership, like what it looks like with the leading 5 ducks to the pond. I love that. That was really funny. But it's really what's inside of somebody that makes somebody want to follow. That's the key, rather than just the superficial.
And the only advice on this, because I don't know, I don't have any data. I mean, that's not my expertise like it is yours. I would always tell my boys, I'd say, well, what, or other dentists, what worked on you? And I'll say, you usually go to sports because we were all exposed to the same sports. And I don't know why Coach Hager walked up to me. I know why. I walked into freshman year of high school. I was 93 pounds with all my clothes on in the lunch pail, and he didn't have anybody at 98. And the minute he saw this little shrimp kid walk in, he rushed right to me. He said, "How much do you weigh?" And I'm like, 93? Perfect. You're my new varsity wrestler. You'll start October. And I grew up with 5 sisters. I played Barbie dolls till I was 12. I'm like, this guy's scaring me. But he totally connected, and it worked on me. So I say, what coaches worked on you? And if they say, I'll give you a very controversial example. Remember, I won't say his name, that basketball coach in Indiana who threw a chair out in the middle of the floor, and everybody's like, he's the worst guy in the world. I don't know. He's coaching, 10 boys who are under 20, who all are bigger than him and can beat the shit out of him, and he's coaching them to a championship. They're not my 5 sisters playing Barbie dolls. I would think you might need a different coaching style for my 5 sisters playing Barbie dolls who ended up nuns than these 5 guys who are going to go out there and win a championship. And who are you to say that Bobby Knight has got the wrong leadership style when he's got the championships to prove it? And I know that's so controversial because some people just think they should just, if he dies, they should dig him up and throw him in jail. So I just say to people, humans are complex. There's a lot of chemistry involved. What worked on you? Who was your favorite leader? And maybe you should be more like that person or whatever. I don't know. Do you think that's good advice, bad advice? What do you think?
No, I think it's great advice. I think I ask all of my clients to think about somebody that's been impactful in their lives, somebody that was their mentor, and what characteristics that they have that they would want to emulate. But to your point about Bobby Knight, for example, Bobby had a leadership style that resulted in compliance with that team. People would comply to Bobby because they feared him. At least this is my interpretation of Bobby Knight. That, unfortunately, is not a great prescription for success in our field. We need to have people do our bidding because they're committed to what we're trying to achieve, not because they're complying. Because over time with compliance, what happens is they feel like they have no stake in the game. They cannot alter anything that happens to them. It's just simply complying, and it becomes a transactional relationship as opposed to a transformational relationship where everybody's better for having been part of it. So the old school command and control type of leadership, unfortunately, is not as successful today as it used to be. And Bobby Knight had great success. He only had these players for a few years. They feared him and they complied with him. But that's not a good prescription for moving forward and creating a culture in a dental practice.
Well, I'm sorry I even brought up the subject because I know he's a very controversial guy. But you know what you just said is spot on because I saw it in dental schools. I mean, every dentist I know, when their dental school sends them a letter for fundraising, you should hear what they tell you at the bar that they wanted to do. They're like, they wanted to do something in a box and mail it back to the dean. And who changed that? Art Dugoni at University Pacific. And then one of his proteges was right out here, Jack Dillenberg at 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 Sill, the founder, the starting dean of that. But in my dental school, I mean, it was the old school world. Maybe it was Bobby Knight world, where kind of like a Marine coach, where they thought that they were. I'm sure they were doing good from the heart, but they thought the harder I am on you, and the bigger asshole I am, and the more difficult I am, it'll bring the best out of you. I mean, the old deal where you bring them a wax, have an ask question, they smash it in their finger and hand it back to you. I mean, they were like that Marine Corps deal. So you had to go into Marine Corps mode, suck it up, buttercup, and realize, okay, and then you just say, mumble under your breath, well, those who do, those who can do, and those who can't teach, whatever, asshole. But if you fought with them, it'd just make your life more miserable. But Art Dugoni and Jack Dillenberg, I mean, I think he is the best. I mean, the night before every freshman class of dental school, every dental student that's going to start the next day, mandatory, at his house, and his only mission is just to get him all drunk till midnight. And they all call him Jack. Every kid had his cell phone number, and if they ever had a problem, they texted Jack. So go back to Notre Dame. Notre Dame, whenever the dean of Notre Dame sends out a fundraising letter, it's $100 million guaranteed. I mean, you just write the check. You don't even know what it's for. It might be to kill the last penguin in Antarctica, but you just sent because that's how you think of them. Same thing with Dillenberg. Same thing with Art Dugoni. And I think these other old school deans that were more like Bobby Knight, they're going to have to adjust because as government dollars come down, there's a lot of squeeze on tuition. You're going to need more support from your alumni. And oh my God, I'm trying to get alumni dollars to a dental school for the way they were treated. Most dentists today will tell you that they won't do it.
You know, the doctor you just mentioned, and I just want to make a quick point here. There's a big difference, Howard, between having authority and being influential. And so I think that's what we see a lot of times, or at least in the old school dental schools. Many of our professors were authoritative. They had a position of authority, but they were not influential. They were not connecting with the people they were teaching. Hopefully that's changing. I'm giving a lecture to a faculty retreat for one of the major dental schools in Texas in a couple of weeks, and that's going to be the point I'm trying to stress. You can have authority, but the question is, are you influential? And the gentleman you just mentioned, who everybody had a cell phone, he was an influencer. He also had authority, but he was also an influencer, and a very great one, apparently, from what you're saying. There's a big difference.
Don't you think the biggest issue in dental schools in Texas is that none of them are accredited? That was my funny. But what were you going to say about that, Mac? What do you want to say about that?
To give a quick example, it's not a dental school example because I knew a couple of people at school that were those influential kind of people. But just for a few months ago, a good friend of mine that's a periodontist that I work with closely, I was scheduled to meet after work one day to review some cases. And he called me up and said, hey, I need to move our appointment to another day. I said, hey, Ron, no problem. He said, yeah, I got to go to Houston to a funeral. And I said, hey, I'm so sorry. He said, yeah, it was my high school football coach. Ron's 58. It was 40 years ago. I said, Ron, that's incredible. He said, Matt, he was one of the most incredible people I've ever known. That's a leader. that's somebody that 40 years later, a lot of his team wanted to show up for, to honor the kind of man he was to them. And I promise you, he was a tough coach. But I said, what's up with your coach? And he said he was a guy that made everybody feel important. And whether you were the guy that was taping up the ankle, or you were the star running back and one of their teammates went on to the NFL, regardless of who you were, you thought that you were top shelf. And that's why they were all showing up for his funeral 40 years later. I thought that was pretty cool.
I think that's the most romantic thing I've ever heard on this show. I mean, really. Because I'm sitting there saying, Tony Hager, like, I feel bad. I assume he's alive. I don't know. What if he did die? You know what I mean? And I didn't even know it or go to the funeral. But you're right. I mean, these coaches, the shaping these teachers are, most of them are a pain in your butt, but some of them are totally transformative. So your website is lineofsightcoaching.com, and the people listening right now, they're on an hour commute to work. If they're lucky, if they're a poor bastard, they're on that treadmill for an hour. And if you're on the treadmill, just get off. There's cheese in the refrigerator and cookies. My gosh, that reminds me of my favorite joke, Kyle. You haven't heard this joke before. So this guy dies, and these two guys are out there fishing, and their boat capsizes and they drown. They both end up as heaven on the same day, and they're buddies for life. And they go down to the cafeteria, and they go, well, what can you eat? And he goes, well, in heaven, there's no calories. You can eat anything you want. It won't affect your cholesterol. Just eat anything you want. And his friend turns over and slaps his other friend. He says, if we wouldn't have got all healthy eating kale, we could have been here 15 years ago. Okay, really? Yeah, but anyway, so again, if you're off the Stairmaster, just get off and go to lineofsightcoaching.com. What are my homies gonna find at lineofsightcoaching.com?
We have our blog, which is pretty robust. We also have all of our coaching products. What we do a lot of different ways that we coach. We coach individually, one-on-one. We do cohorts, which are mastermind calls with individual coaching included. We're doing 2 of them right now. Have about 20 dentists we're coaching. They meet once or twice a month and have discussions about issues in their practice, and we facilitate that. And we also do a full day workshop in which people take the self-assessment of the leadership circle profile, and they leave that day with a leadership development plan based on their own findings. But Howard, one thing I want to mention, if I may, before we go, because I think it really gets to the crux of what we do, is that we try to coach people not only to be better leaders, but to create cultures that produce peak performance. We're big into peak performance. And the only way peak performance can occur is if you have an optimal culture. And the reason we push leadership so hard is that leaders are the ones that create the culture. And if you want to have a practice that reaches peak performance, where everything just meshes this in harmony, and your production is there, and your staff satisfaction is there, and everything else that you can possibly think of that would be involved in an optimal practice, you have to have a culture that supports that. And without your leadership, if you lead either through emotional absenteeism or default leadership, you'll never have the right culture. And that's really the crux behind everything that we do.
Okay, I'm going to share with you a reoccurring bar thing I hear at bars, okay? When a bunch of 60-year-old dentists are at the bar watching the football game, eating a cheeseburger and a beer, and we hear, and then you have the young 30-year-olds, and I hate to say this, it sounds sexist, but, half of them are women. When they talk about staff problems, the older guys are all thinking, well, you don't have a boundary of leader and employee. It's like you're their friend. You don't go out and get drunk with your staff and hold their hair while they puke in a toilet, and then it's supposed to enforce them being mad because they're 15 minutes late for work tomorrow. How do you drink Jello shots until she pukes and then discipline her for coming in late? So it just seems to the older people, and I know all old people. I'll never forget this. Who was the most famous character on Sesame Street? Which one did the kids love the most? Who was the number one kid? number one character of all time on Sesame
Big Bird?
Street. What?
Big Bird?
It wasn't Big Bird, but it was the same guy who played Big Bird. He played another character,
The Cookie Monster.
Oscar the Grouch.
Oscar the Grouch, yeah.
And then that guy retired when a new character, Elmo, beat him out. But you have to wonder, why did 100 million kids? And guess what the psychologist said? Guess who Oscar the Grouch was?
Who?
Grandpa. Because he's sitting there watching it. You don't know what you're yelling when you're watching news, like, oh, those idiots, oh my God, another budget deficit, and if you're 2 years old, you're just looking at Grandpa, and he's just this grouch yelling out of a trash can. And I always think about that when I go over to my grandkids. I don't want to act like I will not turn on the news, because I'll blow a blood vessel just looking at this stuff. But the bottom line is, the question still goes back. Do you think the millennials who get blamed for everything, do you think that they don't have a clear border between, I'm your boss, you're my employee, I don't even know if we can still be best drinking buddy friends? I mean, so will you talk about that a little bit? Do you see that? Do you think it's a generation gap?
Well, I think there has to be a boundary there, and I think probably in some cases there is that lack of boundary. In some cases, there probably isn't. Number one, I do think there has to be a boundary in there. I do think that if you get too enmeshed that way, then it's hard to play a role. However, I don't. At the other end of the spectrum would be where there's a rigid boundary and a command and control kind of system where the power is focused on the leader as the CEO kind of person, and that person is dictating to the followers the rules of engagement and how everything works. I think that end of the spectrum definitely doesn't work. So I think somewhere in the middle is a leader who gets to know and understand the people that work for him, understands that they want meaning from their work, gets to understand them well enough that he or she can invite those people into his or her story, connect what they do and what they want in meaningful work with their role in the practice, and engage them in ways that aren't command and control, but that are very personal, and that leader is really a developer of people. He's not the person that's the Wizard of Oz sitting behind a curtain. He's a developer of people. I think most CEOs see themselves that way. So I think there is something in between. There probably is a disconnect in every generation, and maybe in the millennials, where they are out partying together, and then they lose that distinction of being a leader. But I do think you have to engage enough I see the problem really working with dental teams and assistants. A lot of times they don't get together enough one-on-one or in groups to know each other well enough to really be able to lead and follow effectively.
That is great advice, and I always remind people of one of my favorite leadership guys was Abraham Maslow, an anthropologist, and he really brainwashed me a lot. And he just said, if you have the power to fire them from their job, you're going to be very different. All their other friends can't fire them, and they have bills to pay every month. They got rent, mortgage, equipment. They got all these bills, and you can fire them. And he said, that changes everything. I want to go to a different area. I'm going to read this off your website because I'm fascinated in your Leadership Circle 360 profile. So it says, the Leadership Circle profile is a competency-based 360-degree profile that measures two primary leadership domains: your creative leadership competencies and your reactive tendencies. The assessment tool integrates this information along with your personality so that key opportunities for leadership development immediately shows from the assessment. This insight makes this one of the most comprehensive leadership assessment tools around. Creative competencies that contribute to a leader's effectiveness. They measure how you achieve results, bring out the best in others, lead with vision, enhance your own development, act with integrity, and improve organizational systems. The other one is reactive tendencies, are the ones that map self-limiting tendencies and leadership behaviors. These emphasize caution over creating results, self-protection over productive engagement, aggression over building alignment, and control over collaboration. Man, that's like poetry reading that. Knowing the results of this type of comprehensive assessment on your leadership style will help you understand yourself better so that you can focus on areas to improve in order to get better results. These assessments are administered by certified practitioners who specialize in certain industries and organizational needs. Each leadership circle profile assessment and debrief process is tailored to the individual and their unique development. Dr. Small and Dr. Matt both are certified delivers. So before you tell me about that, I just want to say one thing that I've noticed in 34 years. Every time I meet a dentist who's collecting $2, $3, $4, $5 million, and it's taking, if the average dentist is 187, the oral surgeon are 450, they're in that oral surgery money range of 450 or more. Not only have they had a consultant, a coach, or whatever, but by the time they're my age, they've had a dozen. But the reason they've had a dozen, because they have something you don't have, and that is humility. A lot of the dentists, they just want to keep this eminence front. Remember that song from The Who, it's a put on, it's a put on. You have this eminent front, and you just don't want anybody to find all your dirty laundry. You're trying to make everyone think you're all that in a bag of chips, and it takes a lot of humility to have someone come in and say, hey, your overhead's too high. The last 5 staff that quit from your office all said the same thing. You just don't want this. And that's what we see in human history. When I read 5,000 years of human history, I only learned a few lessons. Lesson number 1 of history is that you'll never learn anything from history. You'll always repeat it. Number 2 is you got to have transparency, like to have a consultant look at all your personal laundry, or you're going to be opaque. And if you're opaque, you're more likely to be violent or ineffective. And then the other one is checks and balance, competition, whatever you want to call it. When I grew up and they didn't allow foreign cars in here, GM had half the market. And on Saturday, half my friends couldn't play because they had to help their dad fix their piece of crap truck. I mean, everybody on a Saturday lived in a garage trying to get these Fords to run and Chevys and all this stuff. And then they let in competition, and everybody laughed at this little Volkswagen Beetle and this little Datsun B210, and they're like, what are they? This is a joke? Yeah. GM now only sells 30% of the cars. So you need competition, and it's competition of ideas. It's someone that can come in your office and say, okay, I know what you believe, Jimmy Knight, but there's another way to look at this. And so if you're humble and you're transparent, I mean, you're not going to get a return on investment on a CAD cam. I don't give a crap what anybody says. I know a guy, I'm not going to say his name because you guys might get back to Rick Workman at Heartland Dental, who has 1,000 dental offices, and he bought half of them. And of the half he bought, guess how many were still using the CAD cam Cerac Sirona machine that the doc bought for $145,000? Guess how many?
I have no idea.
1.
Oh, wow.
1. And you know what I mean? It only got 12% market penetration. If 88% of the dentists said, I don't need this damn thing, and Workman only found 1 office still using it, you're not going to get the return on investment. I mean, I bought that CBCT from Carestream. I might as well just got a hook up to the Hubble Space Telescope. Every time I look at a CBCT, I don't even know what I'm looking at. There's stars and bumps and bright lights, and you just but the only return on investment you'll always get is coaching, consulting. You give a consultant $1, you'll get the $1 back in the calendar year and at least another dime. And you give it to Cerac Sirona, $135,000, and then you'll fly in your staff every weekend to Scottsdale to learn how to use the thing. I mean, look at the CAD CAM machine. So I take an Impergum and I send it to the lab right down the street, and he makes me an all porcelain crown, zirconia, for $100. Here's your idea. Well, Howard, that dummy that you use, he's done like 10, 20, 30,000 crowns. I know what to do. Let's buy a $150,000 machine, and then your assistant who's never made 1 crown? Yeah, we'll have her make the crowns, and we'll speed her up, sending her to Scottsdale every other weekend. Dude, they dig a $250,000 hole before they even stop digging. I mean, it's crazy. And then I'll say, well, why don't you hire this consultant for 50 grand? I would never do something crazy like that. Oh, really, Dr. CAD-CAM? You'd never do something crazy like that? First of all, how much does yours cost?
How much does what cost?
Your line of sight coaching. If my homie logs on, takes the Leadership Circle 360 profile assessment and decides they want to join your program, what does that program cost?
It really depends on which program you're talking about. The cohort program right now is $3,500 for 6 months of individual coaching, and also the mastermind calls that we have with the group. The one-day seminar is something we do at dental meetings. We do it for a lot of specialists for their referring doctors and so forth. The individual coaching, depending on the number of times we meet, can be as much as $1,500 a month. That includes unrestricted access to either Dr. McDonald or myself. And we hop on calls all the time, just without even having scheduled them, to help people talk through different aspects.
What would the range be on a yearly number of your average client per year? What would the range be of how much money they would spend?
$12,000 to $18,000.
Okay, 12 to 18,000. You could buy, one CIRAC machine would buy a decade of that, right? One CIRAC machine would be a decade of that. And that's the point I'm making. You should close down your company and just make a shiny box with some lights on it, aluminum foil, and a couple of antennas, and have it beep if you don't. Make a little R2D2 and make sure it's at least $150,000, and every dentist will buy it. Then you say, well, why don't you have these two older docs come in and look at what you're doing under a magnifying glass for 1/10 the price, and we're going to grow your earnings? And they're just like, I don't want to do that. And I've noticed the ones who don't want to do it. That's what I've been saying. The ones that always do it, the richest ones, they're humble, they're transparent, they let you come in. And if you say, Howard, you're not all that in a bag of chips, you're just a short, fat, bald dumbass, and you need to start doing this, that's a different personality than the ones who just they don't want a partner, they don't want an associate, they don't want a consultant, they don't want anything, and then they blame every problem. Usually it's the government, and if it's not our government, it's the one next to it, or the another one. It's never their fault. And that's what I'm trying to tell you, is get humble and get help, and do it with a dental coach, a dental consultant, and grow your earnings. You're not going to do it with a toy. And that's also the other thing different than physicians. I can go out to have cheeseburgers with 100 physicians, and none of them has ever mentioned their equipment. They never said, oh, we got a new ultrasound machine, and we got a new CAD. And dentists, it's like you sit down with them. Well, I got a CAD cam, and I got a CBCT, and I got a LANAP. And it's like, what? The physicians never talk like that. Why do dentists always talk about machinery and the other 1 million MDs don't? Have you noticed that?
Yes, notice it quite a bit, and it's a fallacy, as we all know. One thing I would mention to you, Howard, that you're talking about return on investment. There are numerous studies. So there's a Harvard Business Review study, Inc., and oh gosh, I could go on and on. That have shown incredible return on investments for leadership training. In fact, one of the gentlemen that we had worked with in the past, by the name of John Mattone, was considered the number 2 coach in the world because he coached, who did he coach, Mac? I'm trying to draw a blank here. Anyway. The guy
what's his name? What's his name?
John Mattone, Mattone.
How do you spell his name? Matone?
Mattone. But anyway, here's my point. He did a study of the Fortune 500 CEOs and asked them what their biggest fear was for the future of their company. And when you think about all the things that are happening in the world right now, these CEOs could be concerned about the devaluation of currency, international policy, so forth and so on. The number one thing that they chose to address as being their biggest fear was a potential lack of leadership in the future for their companies. And how amazing is that when you think of all the problems that corporate America is facing today? All these CEOs, their biggest fear was losing leadership for their companies. So they're seeing something that we in dentistry aren't seeing right now. There was over $166 billion spent on leadership training, according to Forbes 2 years ago. And why are they spending that kind of money? Well, they realize something that dentistry is just now starting to see, and that is that leadership really does matter. That it actually impacts the bottom lines, because these CEOs live and die on the bottom line. So there's something there that's really significant, and we're missing the boat.
Well, what I would add to that, Howard, too, is we both know a lot of consultants and great people, very effective consultants in dentistry that do great work. And I've asked every single one of them how effective is their work, or what determines the ceiling of their work when they go into a practice. And the answer is always leadership. If they have a practice leader that's really effective and a strong leader in the practice, then their work with that practice team and in that practice has a much greater chance of producing a much bigger result. When the leader is not effective there, then there's a ceiling on that performance that's a lot lower, bottom line. And that's with every single one I've ever asked. And that's why major companies or mid-sized companies pay so much money for their leadership at the end of the day, is because they know that person does not have to technically even understand their business, but they have to understand how to develop people, put them in the right place so that those people develop people and build performance. Effective leaders build strong cultures builds performance builds profit and meaning from work.
Steve Jobs.
Yes.
That's who he coached. Steve Jobs.
Steve
That's
Jobs.
Yes.
Huh. And the other thing I want to say about Steve Jobs is, people are very complex. He was adopted, and one of my best friends was adopted. And if you haven't done your 10,000 hours in adoption, World War II was some very neat studies where the Germany would invade a country, and they had really good socialized medicine and records and all that, and they could go back 60, 50 years later and track down all the women who were pregnant during that occupation and delivered a baby, and that baby lived a full life, and they were twice as likely to be obese, substance abuse. Their whole world was totally different than the ones that weren't. And it's the same thing with adoption. When you're adopted and you break that maternal bond, Jobs was adopted, and when I read in his book where he used to go to where his dad worked and his dad didn't know, and he'd sit there and just stare at his dad, I just thought, man, that's a busted boy. And then people get all mad because all of our leaders are full. I get hate mail because I'll say something positive about Walt Disney or Henry Ford because of racist things they thought and did 50 years ago. And it's like, well, I wasn't alive back then. All my heroes are flawed, is what I'm saying. Can you comment on that? How are you supposed to get your mind around, like, okay, Steve Jobs, I wouldn't want him as a dad. He might have been an asshole to a lot of people, but dude, he got me the iPhone. Doesn't making the iPhone give you a pass on? And then to hear his daughter, who inherited $5 billion, out on the talk shows bitching, it's like, well, why don't you give the money away? Why don't you give me the $5 billion? Then you can go bitch all you want about him, but don't take his $5 billion, bitch about him. But the succinct question is, like for me, am I never supposed to mention Henry Ford or Walt Disney again because they gave me an iPhone, but they screwed up in other areas of their life? How do you reconcile that?
I think we're all flawed, Howard. That's one thing the LCP 360 shows us. It shows us our reactive tendencies, which are flaws. And we don't get rid of them. What we need to do is be self-aware and know that we have those tendencies, which Brene Brown would say are the armor that we wear to protect ourselves from vulnerability. And once we recognize that we have to be vulnerable or humble, as you say, then we know how to catch ourselves when we go into those reactive modes and how to dial them down. We're not getting rid of them because they are who we are. We're flawed people, and we have those flawed tendencies, but we have to recognize and know when to turn them down and when to turn them up, because some of those reactive tendencies have actually got us where we are today, but they're not serving us as we go forward. But to think that we're not flawed, I think, is a fallacy. I think we're all flawed in some way or another.
And 100%, Howard, I would piggyback on this because you find, going back to what coaches do, we find so many beliefs and assumptions and patterns of thinking in people that are just not factually correct or objective. And that's what leads people into unproductive or unsuccessful places or become the barrier for them. And a recent story for me that might relate to how you're viewing history and what that means right now. I've had multiple conversations with friends in recent weeks about the Asian hate crimes and the things that have been done against people that are, mad with Asians or whatever. It's just a lot of stupid stuff. And so we kind of went through all that, and I listened a lot and learned a lot. And I hate bad things happening to people like that. So last weekend, Hideki Matsuyama wins the Masters. I was so happy for him. And I thought, this is pretty poetic. Hideki, first Japanese ever to win that. I send out an email to a lot of people about Hideki winning. Well, a few of them sent an email back to me discussing the crimes of Japan against Korea and China in the 1940s. Is Korea, was Japan guilty? Yes, they were. They also dropped bombs on Pearl Harbor. And I said, so they did that, but then we dropped an atomic weapon on Hiroshima and, to end that war. And I said, it's hard to find innocent hands here. As we're all flawed. We're all guilty of things that we wished hadn't happened or our ancestors are. And I think it would be absurd to throw away history because I think we're all guilty of things that we wish were different in the past. Now, that may not be what you had in mind, but I think sometimes we can get so wrapped up in an individual pattern of thought, we realize, as much as this piece of history bothers us and we can now look back and see it as being wrong and immoral, gosh, there's other pieces that were perpetrated against other people that are equally wrong.
The United States is the only country who's dropped a nuclear bomb on women and children, not once, but twice. I mean, for someone from the United States to badmouth another country. I mean, did you, we have a professor at University of Tucson, Noam Chomsky, and my favorite video lecture of his is if, after World War II, all those German Nazis were tried in the Nuremberg trials in Nuremberg, and they were hung and all that stuff. The same lawyers, the same laws, the same everything would have hung every U.S. president since World War II, and he goes through all the war crimes. So you don't even have one president that would survive Nuremberg. So for an American to talk about politics, I mean, Americans are Darth Vader, so remember that. But I know how my homies think. And she's driving, she's listening to this. She wants to hear a story of like one of your clients. I mean, like, why are clients calling you? And by the way, I know we went over an hour, but can I keep you on overtime? I still got more questions.
I'm great with that.
Oh, okay. If I go to McDonald's, it's a Big Mac, fry, and a Coke. When your phone rings with a new dentist, what is your Big Mac, fry, and a Coke?
Joel, why don't you take this one?
What is our what now? I'm sorry.
Well, what are the top 3 reasons someone becomes your client? The people listening to you, they want to know, like, what's going on in my industry? Why are they calling you? What's the normal clients? Why are they calling you?
Well, mostly it's disillusionment. As we talked earlier, and I mentioned the younger dentists, they haven't had enough life experience to face all the problems. See, what happens, Howard, is the consultants, which I think are wonderful. When I grew up in dentistry, they would come in and teach us how to manage systems. And so we became very proficient at system management. We were really good at that because we were very diligent in managing systems. But system management only takes you so far. But what they left us with, and I think this is a key point, what the consultants left us with was a sense that we were leading if we were managing systems, and nothing could be further from the truth. And so we thought we were leading and managing systems, and because we were just managing systems and not truly leading, we run into some of the issues with staff problems and so forth that disillusion us. And here's the reality of it. The blind spot is that we think we're leading, but we're not. And that creates a self-limiting belief because we think we failed at leadership, which we weren't even doing in the first place. And we say to ourselves, I can't lead. Okay. And so at that point, there's disillusionment. How do we extricate ourselves from this problem, from this disillusionment, from the staff issues, from the other issues we're facing? And that's when they call, because they're in a state of disillusionment. That would be number one. Number two would be staff issues that they don't know how to deal with, staff turnover and so forth. And number three is they just come to the realization that there's just something wrong in their practice. They don't know what it is. They've tried every other avenue, and they find out about us, and then they call.
Yeah, and I would say with that disillusionment is there's a lot of loss of meaning from work. It's just that whether that they're just too busy and they're on the treadmill, or they bought into the fact that, as you said earlier, that benefits organizations are in charge of their decisions and how they operate their practice, so they have to follow suit there, or some other style. They're tired, they're burnt out, they're exhausted. They don't know how to have a professional practice, have meaning from it, and make it profitable, and develop their team in such a way that they're developing a leadership team there that will help them share the burden, increase the performance, and increase the enjoyment of their practice. They've got holes in all of that, and they're kind of stuck. They've hit the wall, and probably the team thing is the biggest thing, and they just don't know how to get past it. And they've made a lot of assumptions that are just not true, and we've got to help them get past that.
I always say, I have 4 boys. I made 4 boys in 60 months, and I wrote a book or 2 like you guys. And I always say, writing a book's like having a baby. It takes 9 months. Joel, you wrote Face to Face, and Mac, you wrote Unchanging Points of Light. Why did you decide to make a baby, this book? And I'm sure it took more than 9 months to write. Did it take more than 9 months?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my gosh. So talk about your book babies.
Well, from my perspective, when I went back to school and got my MBA, I was introduced to some of the opinion leaders in leadership and a lot of the great literature that's out there. And it overwhelmed me. I couldn't believe it. I really saw it for the first time how I was deficient in my leadership skills. And that compelled me to change my leadership skill set. And in doing so, I came to the realization that I wasn't alone in this world as far as that goes, that my colleagues were suffering as well. And that compelled me to write Face to Face, because I knew there was a message there that as dentists, we have seldom heard, if we've heard it at all. And that was a point in writing that book and publishing it. Mac, how about you?
Well, so the first thing, Howard, is I'm not a normal person. So Joel can attest to that. And so I enjoy a lot of things, related to faith and philosophy. And so that was a lot of the basis. But really, it was after going through a painful time in life where I'd gone through a divorce. And, it was just a low point. So it was a little bit of a therapy. And then that was when Joel was coaching me. And he encouraged me to write this book. I already had a lot of the content on my laptop, just kind of ideas in there that were half written. And he said, this was after he had written Face to Face. And he said, I think you just ought to do it. This will help you. And Joel could see in me things I couldn't see in myself at the time, which was really a lot of my attraction to coaching, because I realized, from a point of brokenness and just disappointment in myself at that point in time, that the power of somebody else seeing in you what you couldn't see in yourself, and a desire to want to do that with other people. So from that came a book, and there was just a lot of meaning in there. I think the Unchanging Points of Light is just a metaphor about a captain at sea 200 years ago guided his vessel by stars in the sky because there wasn't anything else. And that's how he could get home. And so when you're lost and when you've gone through something difficult, you need some reference points, some absolute guides. And so for me, that was the idea of the book. So that's why I wrote it. I'll send you a copy and you could add it to the stack. But it was therapy. So I wrote it, Howard, mostly on Friday mornings at Starbucks by my apartment. I'm a pretty good Starbucks customer, but it was great therapy. So I'm thankful to Joel for the encouragement to write it. And then he referred me to a gentleman that helped me put the pieces together. In the publishing end of things. And I'm really happy that I did. It was more a therapeutic exercise than a financial exercise, but it was good therapy.
Yeah, and one of my buddy is a psychologist, and he says he used the example of marriage. He goes, okay, so your marriage got divorced, and so now you don't want to talk about it, and he says you're just gonna take all your problems to the next one. So so just you got to figure this out sometime. But he says most people have usually gone through at least 3 divorces before they seek professional help because they think all their problems were their last wife. And like in my case, that would be true, but in everyone else's cases, that would not be true. But in my case, it was definitely true. I was perfect. And in fact, I had to get rid of my swimming pool because whenever I dive in a swimming pool, I couldn't go beneath the water. I could just walk right across the water, and I couldn't swim. And that's my point. All the humble dentists will talk it out, and they'll get consultants and coaches. And then all the ones who think that all their problems are a secret. And in fact, Joel, we were laughing at CAD CAM. I mean, now the big deal with the endodontists, they're going to solve their practice by getting that sawn endo for $75,000, deciding to take 2 hours to do a root canal instead of 1, with $1,500 of disposables at each one. And let me just say this to you. Let me just tell you to drive this home. In this area, there are some orthodontists that leave it in just perfect occlusion. They're Panky, they're TMJ. I mean, they're just the best orthodontists. And one of them went bankrupt. I couldn't believe an orthodontist actually went bankrupt. How bad is your personality when you're an orthodontist go bankrupt? And the other one finally sold his practice and moved out of state. And then we have these 2 other guys they're just average, happy-go-lucky C-plus orthodontists, and everybody loves them, and they talk, and they always shake mom's hand. They're always running for mayor. Everybody loves them, and the endodontists think, really, you think you're gonna fix your office with a sawn endo? I mean, and furthermore, a sawn endo, it doesn't even work until all the canals are found and filed up to like at least a 25. Well, shit, that's all my problems. I just want something to find the MB2. Once I found all the canals and worked it out to a 25, you're telling me now I need to invest $75,000 more? You know what I mean? It's like, oh my God. It's like, I just wish I'd give you $75,000 if you swore to me I'd always find all the canals and get them worked out to a 20. I'd give you $75,000 for that, but not $75,000 after that. But again, my homies love them. But they're always going to solve everything with a $75,000 piece of equipment. And how do you get them to realize that a $50,000 coach, yeah, you'll get all your money back, and that'll be your launch base. And but no, it's going to be a sawn endo.
I would say spend 1/3 of that, get a good coach, and get a better return on your investment.
Yeah, investing in yourself, however you're doing that, is always your best investment. Whether that's coaching or clinical training or whatever. Investing in yourself is always your best investment if you're investing wisely with good people. 100%. I just don't think you go wrong.
One of the things that they fear, it's all fear-based. A lot of people always point out that Socrates said we only had 2 emotions, greed and fear. But I think it was Darwin that was a little more clear that all species you're either a predator or prey. This coronavirus showed you that. I don't care if you're the apex creature, a little virus can take you out. So you look at everything and you either think it's a resource and I'm going to go over there and eat it, or I'm scared it's going to eat me. And one of the things they're afraid about, you guys, the most, and I know them, I know my homies, is you're going to come in there and make them drop all their insurance and PPOs and all that kind of stuff. Or the even bigger one than that, I don't know which one's bigger. It's that or this. Well, I know my assistant I know she's a lunatic. I mean, she makes Conor McGregor look sane, but I love her. And I know you're going to come in and do your tasks and you're going to say, you need to fire Amy or I'm going to shoot her. And then it's the opposite. Then the next sentence flips it around and says, well, how do you know if Amy's trainable or if I should just cut bait and reload my hook? I mean, so those are the two deals. Are you going to come in and make me drop Delta Dental and all the insurance and all that? And how are you going to decide? I mean, this assistant's been assisting me for 10 years and I can't tell which one's crazy. I always tell people this, look, 1/4 of the planet is completely insane. And if you don't believe that, it's because you're the insane one. You know what I mean? But so those are the two issues that they're afraid to commit because they haven't wrestled. Am I going to drop all my insurance? Am I going to fire Eileen? So deal with those two fears right now.
First of all, we would never come in and tell them to drop insurance. Okay, I mean, that's going to be a decision they have to make on their own. That's really not in our wheelhouse, so to speak. Okay, now, how they deal with their staff is a whole different story. And many times we have people that are having staff problems, and it's just like you were saying earlier, Howard, they're saying it's everybody else's problem but mine, when in reality, we ask them, number one, have you given your staff the resources, the support, the training, and the authority to act independently of you? See, what happens is we as leaders or owners of practices become the bottleneck for the practice, and everything has to pass through us. And so our staff becomes very much, what's the term I'm looking for? Subservient to us. They don't feel like they have the authority and the support to act without our consent. But once we set the boundaries, we determine the values and set the boundaries, we want them to develop. At Line of Sight Coaching, we believe a culture should have two things. It should be values-based and it should be growth-oriented. And if you can have a values-based culture where values are non-negotiable and you can develop people, then you're going to have a successful culture. And the people in the culture are going to buy into it much quicker than if you don't do that. So if you can develop mutually accepted values with your staff and set boundaries around those values and develop them and quit being the problem solver, let them start to think independently of you, they're going to line up in the way you want them to line up. They're going to be the much more efficient staff. And that's the only way you're going to take that team to peak performance is by doing that.
Nice and well said. Go ahead, Mac. Go ahead, Mac.
Yeah, on like the benefits question, Howard, as you well know, that's a common everyday question that dentists wrestle with. So I would, if that subject came up, I would just ask the dentist, what do you want? Do you want to move away from dependency on benefit contracts? Or how do you feel about that? What does it mean to you? And if you do want to do that, do you know what it looks like to have a practice that is less dependent or not dependent on that? Meaning, do you know what a successful practice looks like that's outside of benefit contracts dependency? Because it's a different practice. Do you know what it takes to create that? And then thirdly, if you don't know that, then you need to get clear on it. So we're going to work on trying to get real clear on that, asking more questions, trying to clarify that. And then thirdly, are you willing to do those things? That because you can't show up with the same practice that has been dependent on, engaged with benefit contracts and think that that same thing will succeed in a fee-for-service model, because the fee-for-service model is different. Just like going from fee-for-service to a benefit contract model is different. So you have to have different skill sets, different systems, probably some more highly developed team members, and there's some work to do there. So for me, it's first, does the client or potential client, are they clear on what's important to them? Do they know what they want? If they're moving away from that, do they know why? Do they have some idea that is some Pollyanna kind of place over here that's not a realistic idea? And then secondly, do they know what it looks like? Thirdly, do they know what it takes to live there successfully before they make this leap that, and then finally, do you have a plan about stepwise? You got to do a lot of analysis to know how would you do that? Because that's risky business, and it's probably not all at once. It's one step at a time.
Okay, now I gotta tell you, I got this tough one: staff turnover. How do you retain good employees? I'm in Arizona, and our governor Ducey, I don't care if you love him or hate him, it just is. Everybody's been complaining about state boards a long time, and it got to the point in Arizona that it was easier for the hospitals to go hire registered nurses in Ireland and get them to move to Arizona than it was from California. And the governor said, this is completely insane. And he passed a law, said, if you're licensed for anything in any state, it's good in Arizona, which made us ground zero for DSOs. 18 out of every 100 dentists in Arizona work for a DSO. So no, in fact, on that long tail, 5 states aren't even at 1%, and we're at 18. So this is all DSOs. And I love these guys. They're my friends. It's too overly simplistic to say, well, I'm good and they're evil. Oh, shut up. Get sophisticated. I'll tell you some good things about the DSOs. Before they got here, if your granddaughter fell off her tricycle and broke her tooth off on a Sunday, you'd find 3 mermaids before you found a dentist open. And when they rolled up into town, they're open 7 to 7 days a week. So the patient's going to win because there's more competition. Remember, transparency versus opaque, absolute power versus competition, checks and balances, whatever. But here's what everybody that comes in the office says. Well, I went in this DSO, or they don't know it's a DSO, but they call it the name. And this dentist told me I needed 4 cavities. So I went up, I scheduled, and I came back. And now that dentist ain't even there anymore. And now it's a new dentist, and he says I got 3. And then I came back 6 months later for my checkup, and now that dentist even. And then on LinkedIn, my God, I think half the dental businesses on LinkedIn are trying to find a doc in the box, and they're getting paid $5,000 to find a dentist to go to a DSO. So it's big money, and they can't even keep him 1 year. 1 year is the turn. So I don't know. I don't know how you build a dental business if you can't keep the dentist. And it's the same thing in staff. You could have the worst hygienist in the world, and she finally quits and dies and moves. I had this one, I'll give you the example. I had this one hygienist, loved her, but this is back in the days of the cuss store. She was so brutal. When she was done, when you would sit up to rinse and spit in the cuss store, it looked like you spit your liver out. And but everyone loved her. And I'm like, you don't have to do a gingivectomy on a routine cleaning if they don't have gum disease. But I just thought she was the most brutal hygienist that ever lived, and everybody loved her. But the bottom line is they'd always come back and they wanted her, and they called by name. And so when you're selling the invisible, I know this is an iPhone. I know this is a Diet Coke. And I know Jack Daniels is an Irish whiskey. There's some things, that I know. But they don't know dentistry. They don't know when you say they have 3 cavities. It's like me. I grew up with 5 sisters playing Barbie dolls. And when I take my car to the same dealer, because I bought my Lexus there. And when he comes in the other, sometimes he'll say, well, I think your lifters, can you hear your lifters? Dude, I don't even know what a lifter is. You're here, you have a uniform, a name, a big brand. If you need help dressing a Barbie doll, I'll get out of the car and help you, but I'm sure as hell I'm not going to, anyone to show me my brake pads, what am I supposed to even look at? You know what I mean? Unless it was a brake pad on a pink Barbie doll car. But the bottom line is when you're selling the invisible and the patients come back every 6 months and there's new hygienists, new associates, it's just not good. It's not good economically. There's nothing good about it. So if one of the, so if some dentist is listening to you right now and saying about hiring an associate, well, how are you going to retain them? How are you going to keep them? What is your answer to this plague of staff turnover that if the DSOs don't get over, if they don't solve this, they've got nothing?
Well, If you're talking about staff, and you also mentioned associates, I think it's really the same thing. The reason people leave, at least is our opinion, is that people leave because there are unmet expectations. And how can we meet people's expectations if we don't know what they are? So we recommend, particularly with associates, so to speak, that you create what's called a declaration of expectations, and then sit down and have this discussion before you jump into any type of relationship with that person. The same can be done with staff. What does the staff expect of you? And what do you expect of them? Are they just left to make assumptions as to what your expectations are? The other thing that happens too is that burnout is becoming an epidemic in our profession. And one of the reasons people burn out is because they work long hours, long, tedious hours. But the new definition of burnout now is working long, tedious hours with no opportunity for self-improvement. So if you can have an honest discussion with your staff and direct them in ways that they can improve, not just within the practice, but improve as people, then the likelihood of burnout is much less. We found that our clients that have outside interests actually are less susceptible, I should say, to burnout than those that are strictly involved in their dental practice. So that is an important aspect. It applies to the staff as well. So those are two things I think that would help maintain the staff. Go ahead, Matt.
I would, that is actually Joel's a document of expectations, I think, is stroke of genius. So I think that's kind of foundational to it. But I would say, just in an emotional sense, we have to offer something to our team that they can't get anywhere else, meaning, or that's rare. It's just like the same thing for a patient. So what do we offer to a team person that's hard to get? So number one is meaningful work. How do we make it meaningful? We make it meaningful by understanding what's important to them and being real clear about what their role is, plugging them into that, being a place where we can develop them, where we're committed to developing them, where we're going to build a relationship, where we're going to give them authority. They can learn, if they, so to speak, want mastery, and that they can have some purpose. Daniel Pink says 3 things that motivate human beings are authority, mastery, and purpose. I think he's right. That's not the end of the list, so to speak. But I think we can do that, be the kind of place that does that. That does not mean everybody responds to that. But when you create the structure and the environment where you have that kind of culture and organization, the right people respond. The people that leave, that don't want that, are probably not the rock stars you're looking for. So the people that are really quality employees, when you can offer them that kind of environment, people that are recognized for good work, people that want to build relationships, I think more often than not, they stay. Probably the same thing with associates. I'm not saying that it's magical, but it's the same thing with patients. I tell patients all the time, thank you for coming to see us. You drove past a lot of dental practices to come to mine, and you didn't have to do it. You have a lot of other choices. And I know that we bear the burden of offering them an experience that they believe is worth coming back for. If we don't do that, we're out of business. It's that simple. So we have to, either as a practice owner to our patients, or a practice owner to team or potential teammates or associates, we have to offer something that's hard for them to get someplace else to compete well. And a DSO or a big organization has a lot of advantages over me. Absolutely. They have business power behind them. They have marketing, they have branding, they have a lot of things like that. I have advantages over them that they can't reproduce. And those are relationship-based advantages. Those are some longevity in the marketplace and some things about my brand, because I think our brands are about the promises that we make, and do we keep them. Every single day that I kill a pulp in my practice, which is pretty often, I make statement about, when Joel was here, about Joel, but about Joel and his partners, that I think is pretty valuable. I tell my patients, like I did twice today, that they're fantastic clinicians. They're better people. I trust them implicitly. that's where I would go. And that's why you're going here. I make a strong referral and I make sure they know it's special. And that's why I'm referring them there. And they sit there and shake their heads and they go. And so what's that worth? That's what I'm pointing at. And I know that's old school, Howard, but I mean, I don't care if it's 2021 or 1901. When you say those kind of things to people with conviction, there isn't a marketing guru in the world that can create that unless it's real. And so I believe it. And so I think it works really well. And I kill a lot of pulps. And so Joel's partners get to do the endo on it. I don't know if that speaks, but I think we have to offer something that's rare and valuable to those people to keep them. And it's not easy, I admit.
Final deal. Here's the final deal. I know we've all lectured a million times and you say, hey, does anybody have any questions? No one has a question. I say, okay, well, let's go take a bathroom break. And then 20 people run up to you with the same question. They all can't do this because you don't understand. They have a very unique situation that everyone else has. So what is the, how do you have any non-obligatory, deal? I mean, can they call you for 10 minutes? I mean, I don't know if they'll commit before they because they all have this special condition that every single dentist has. So how can they talk to you without, do you have some phone number, email? Should they go to your website? What is the best way for them to reach out to you?
There's actually a place on our website where they can request and we say 30-minute, it could be longer, but a 30-minute free complimentary consultation with us to see what their problems are and if we'd be a good fit for them. So you go to lineofsightcoaching.com, you'll find a place on that website to make a request for a complimentary consultation. We can discuss your needs to see if you're a good fit or if we're a good fit for you.
Well, man, I'll tell you what, thanks for helping so many people. And I say, this isn't the first time I've had you on the show. This is the second time. And I don't do commercials. You didn't pay me to come on the show. In fact, you offered to pay me if I would not have you come on the show. You're like, I can't talk to you for another hour. Please die. But thank you so much. And Doc, look, man, this is a free podcast. All three of us guys are old. And, man, why do you reinvent the wheel? It's so crazy. I mean, there's older people that it's like this economy. I don't care if you think Tesla's worth 1,500 times earnings, because I don't know, maybe right now you're on an LSD trip in the middle of the desert and it makes sense to you right now. But I can tell you as an old guy, I know where this is going to end. And if you believe in Bitcoin, that's fantastic. I got 7 grandchildren who believe in mermaids. If I ask 7 of my grandchildren, well, I'm sorry, all the girls, not the boys. If I ask all the girls, what do you want to be when you grow up? Now, again, the oldest one, they're not very old, but they have to think because they don't know if it's going to be a mermaid or a unicorn. Dude, I get it. But I know when Raya Rue, I don't know how old she'll have to be, but one day she'll know there's no such thing as mermaids and unicorn. And old people, knowledge has no value if it's not transferable. And gosh darn, quit learning everything the hard way. And the reason you won't call Joel and Mac is because of your pride. I mean, you want to call Joel an endodontist and show him some PA where you found 5 canals and there were lateral puffs of gutta perch everywhere. And he's just going to look at it and go, oh, that's the best obturation I've ever seen. Dude, that's not what we're talking about. You need to do everything faster, easier, higher quality, lower cost. And man, if you're a doctor in the United States, I mean, look at the donut business. Look at the whole business. Every donut store in Arizona is open from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. 7 days a week. Is that how you want to live? Is that, work smarter, not harder, and let people who have been there, done that 10 times before you got out of dental school Just make your life easier. And you're not going to find it in a Sonendo, a CAD CAM. And look at a CBCT. I don't know of a real doctor in Arizona that would have a CBCT. They send you to a radiographic center. I mean, when you have a problem, they don't say, oh, I bought an MRI and it's right back here in my waiting room. Nobody. Everybody goes somewhere. So why did you buy a $100,000 CBCT? And then I'll tell you another thing. Since you bought that $145,000 CBCT, in 5 years, when it reminds you of your old Nokia phone, you're not going to go buy a new one because you finally paid it off. So now you're going to have a shitty Nokia phone the rest of your life because you had to own it. You don't need a CBD. You need a radiology center. And every periodontist and oral surgeon will just let you go over there and use theirs because they want a referral. You don't need a CAD CAM. You don't need a Sonendo. You know what you need? You need to get your head screwed on straight. And if you got your head screwed on straight, you're done. Everything else, you just, give enough time, you're going to get there. So, dude, get your head on this straight. Thank you so much, guys, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right, have a great day.